Hi, I'm Stu from Hive Mind Automation and welcome to the Hive. I've realized it's been nearly 2 years now since I first did my Getting Started video series, and a lot has changed with Home Assistant since that time. So in this new Getting Started video series, we're going to be working through getting started with Home Assistant in 2022, and hopefully we'll see some of the differences along the way. But if you're just getting started on your home automation journey, this is video 2 in what will be a multi-video series. Last week I spoke about why you might want to get into home automation. So while I roll the intro, why don't you take a moment to subscribe? And if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get a notification when I release new videos each week. And if you want to support the channel, check out my affiliate links in the video description down below, including a link to join up to NordVPN. And there's also a Buy Me a Coffee link in that video description as well to help to support the channel. With all of those things out of the way, let's get started. Now, my home automation journey started a few years ago when I was given a LifeX smart bulb as a gift. Because it was one of the very first generation LifeX bulbs, it didn't have native HomeKit compatibility, and we're an Apple family. I quickly began searching for a way to get it into HomeKit, and that led me to try out a couple of different open source projects with limited success. And I finally landed on Home Assistant. Home Assistant is a free and open source home automation platform that puts local control and privacy first. It runs locally on your own server, whether that's a Raspberry Pi like I have here, or any other single board computer. Maybe you've got an old computer lying around, or even just in a Docker container on a NAS if that's what floats your boat. What really drew me to Home Assistant was the community support for the product and the sheer volume of integrations available for Home Assistant. At the time of writing, there were more than 1,900 integrations available, including LifeX, Philips Hue, Insteon, Ecobee, Shelly, IKEA, Xiaomi, Ring, Tesla, Lutron, Roku, HomeKit, Unify, Tuya, Wiz, iRobot, and many, 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 many more. So whether it's lights, blinds, security cameras, security alarms, vacuums, cars, home batteries, weather stations, or even public transport services, there's a good chance you'll be able to find an integration for Home Assistant. Because of that sheer number of integrations for Home Assistant, we then can integrate multiple platforms from different vendors that otherwise wouldn't talk to each other. So things like motion sensors from your home alarm system can then do double duty as a motion sensor for turning lights on and off throughout the house. Or alternatively, you can use rainfall data from a local weather service API to make decisions about whether or not to water the plants. Before we can get Home Assistant started on our network, we are going to need to select some hardware to run it on. And this becomes a little bit of a choose your own adventure. Now, I started out running Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi Model 3, and it was plenty capable, but I've since upgraded to a Raspberry Pi 4. But I've also got a Home Assistant Yellow on pre-order, and if you're not familiar with Home Assistant Yellow, when that arrives I'll be doing a full video on it. It does run on a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4. With the chip shortage still making it super difficult to find Raspberry Pis, it can make it a little bit difficult to get started on a Raspberry Pi if you don't already have one. But another option is if you've got an old computer lying around that you'd otherwise be throwing away, you can get some new life out of it by using it as your Home Assistant server, and it doesn't need to be a great computer. If you're a data hoarder like me and you've got a NAS at home, some of these will also provide the ability to run Docker containers. QNAP and Synology come to mind. You can run Home Assistant in Docker, but it will be a different experience for you from what we are going to be demonstrating today. I'll be demonstrating how to set up on a Raspberry Pi 4. And as part of that, I'm going to be rebuilding my demo instance on this Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gigabytes of RAM. And I've also got a PoE hat on top so that I can power it and get network to it over this one Ethernet cable. I'm working on another video as well to set up Home Assistant on an old PC, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. Now, during the initial setup, you're definitely going to need an Ethernet cable. Afterwards, you can set up your Home Assistant to connect using Wi-Fi. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think I'd recommend keeping the Ethernet cable connected at all times for a reliable network connection to your Home Assistant server. Now, if you're going down the Raspberry Pi route, there's also a couple of other prerequisites. You're also going to need to have a way to power the Raspberry Pi. On a Raspberry Pi 4, there's USB Type-C power in there, or if, like me, you have a power over Ethernet enabled switch, you can get the PoE Plus hat. I'm going to be reusing the SD card from my demo instance. You do need to make sure that this SD card is nice and fast. U3 is a good start, but application class 2 or A2 is best, and the Home Assistant team recommend a minimum of 32 gigabytes. You're also going to need a method to image the SD card, so an SD card reader, such as this hyperdrive dock that I have here with the micro SD card slot here. You're also going to need some imaging software, and for the purposes of this video, we're going to be following the instructions from the Home Assistant team and using Balena Etcher. On the homeassistant.io getting started page, you can see we've got some installation instructions, and it tells us exactly what we need to know. So we've got some different hardware options such as Raspberry Pi, Odroid, Asus Tinkerboard, a generic x86 such as an old computer. You can run it in a VM on Windows, Mac OS or Linux, and there's some alternative methods not covered there as well. Obviously for us, we're going to be looking at the Raspberry Pi option, so I'm going to click on that Raspberry Pi option, and it says to remember you're using an appropriate power supply. Mobile chargers may not be suitable since some are designed to only provide the full power with that manufacturer's handsets. USB ports on your computer will also not supply enough power and should not be used. So there's some hardware suggestions here. A Raspberry Pi 4. 3 is okay too if you have one laying around. And there's also some recommendations of how you can find them. RPi Locator doesn't seem to have any information on availability in Australia. I have seen some available using ScorpTech though. It mentions also a power supply for the Pi 4 or a power supply for a Pi 3, micro SD card. Application class 2 is ideal. They handle small I/O much better and much more consistently than cards not optimized to host applications. 32 gigabytes or bigger, an SD card reader, and an Ethernet cable. Our first step, once we've met our prerequisites, is to write the image to our boot media. And for that, we're going to attach the SD card to the computer, download and start Balena Etcher, and then select Flash from URL. And then we can choose either the 64-bit version, the 32-bit version, or if we're on a Pi 3, 64 or 32. It is now recommended to use the 64-bit version. It will run faster and it will also address more than 4 gigabytes of RAM properly if you are happening to run on the Pi 4 with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Not to mention there are add-ons coming down the pipeline from Home Assistant that will not be supported on the 32-bit operating system. So I'm just going to click this copy here, and that's going to copy this address to my clipboard. And I'm going to head back over to my desktop and I'm going to start up Balena Etcher. I'm going to grab my SD card and plug it into the card reader. So when I plug the card into the card reader, it says it's not readable by this computer. I'm just going to ignore that message. Now, when we've got Balena Etcher open, I'm going to click on Flash from URL, and I'm going to paste in the URL that I copied a moment ago. You'll see that I've got an older one here. That's HasOS version 8.1. As of the time of filming, the HasOS version is 8.2. I'm going to click OK on that, and it's going to take a moment to download that image file. Okay, fantastic. So the image has downloaded and we're ready to now select our target, and we're going to select this generic mass storage class media, which is a 32 gigabyte unit, and it's the only external device that I have plugged in. We can expand this to show to hidden, which is just going to show me my internal SSD, so my system drive, and also another locked system drive in here as well. So I'm just going to use the generic mass storage one. I don't want to touch my internal SSDs on my Mac. I'll click select. So we've got our image, generic mass storage media, and now we just click flash. And this is going to now ask me to put in my password for the Mac because it needs privileged access to flash disks. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to take a couple of minutes to flash the disk. And we'll come back in about 30 seconds or so when this is done. Okay, so the flashing has completed. That took around about 3 minutes or so, and we've got this same alert: the disk you attached was not readable by this computer. We're going to ignore that again. If we wanted to, we could flash another, but we're pretty much done now with Balena Etcher, so I'll close that window and I'll grab my SD card out of the reader. And now over here we can take the Raspberry Pi and we will put the SD card in there. So we'll just pop that in there. So now with the SD card flashed and inserted into the Raspberry Pi, in my case I'm using power over Ethernet, but if you are not using power over Ethernet, then you would still plug the Ethernet cable in, and then you would plug power into the Raspberry Pi. I'm just going to plug in the one cable and get power and Ethernet in the one cable. So I'm just going to plug the Ethernet cable in here, and you'll see our lights have come on, the fan has spun up, and the Raspberry Pi is now going to start up. It's going to take a couple of minutes for the Home Assistant interface to be available, so I will open up a window here and we'll take this full screen. We're going to try going to Home Assistant.local:8123. Now, if this doesn't work on your network because you have different security settings, you can try just Home Assistant:8123, or you can use my previous video on how to find your Home Assistant address in order to find the IP address of your Home Assistant instance. So I'm going to put Home Assistant.local:8123 in here, and it hasn't found it. I'm going to give that a minute or two and just try refreshing the page. Okay, so it took a couple of minutes for the interface to start up, and now it's telling us that it's preparing Home Assistant, and this can take up to 20 minutes. So it says, while you're waiting, here's some suggestions. You can read the founder's vision for the perfect home automation, or you can install the official Home Assistant apps for iOS from the App Store, or for Android from Google Play, or join in on the community forums or on the Discord chat. We're just going to let this sit for a few minutes, and when we come back, we will be able to continue with the onboarding. Okay, so it's been about 4 or 5 minutes and we are now invited to set up our user account on our Home Assistant setup. So I'm going to type in my name here and I'm going to change my username here and I'm going to set a password. Okay, so I've got my name, my username, I've set my password and I'll click create account. So now we're going to set up a name for our home. I'm going to put in Hive Mind Demo. And it wants to know where we live. It'll help with displaying information and setting up sun-based automations. It's not shared outside of our network, and we can help fill in the information by making a one-time request to an external service. I'm going to click detect. So I've clicked detect here. It's figured out that I'm in Australia. I'm in the Melbourne time zone. It has no idea what my elevation is. It's around about 40 meters. And the units I'm going to use a metric. You can set these to imperial if you like, and it's also figured out my currency is AUD, and I'm going to click next. And now we can share anonymized information from the installation to help make Home Assistant better and help convince manufacturers to add local control and privacy focused features. The keyword here is anonymized information. This will be information about your system, so perhaps the Raspberry Pi that you're running it on. Details of what you use with Home Assistant, so the integrations that you have enabled and the accessories that you're actively using within your Home Assistant instance. Statistical data about the total number of data points in your Home Assistant setup. And some crash reports about when unexpected errors occur. Now, this is obviously a choose your own adventure here. I'm going to turn all of these on because I want Home Assistant to get better with the data that I share. If you're concerned about the information not being anonymized enough, by all means, leave these checkboxes off. And I'll click next now, and it's discovered some devices and services already on my network. So things like my TP-Link dishwasher switch, my WLED bedroom LED strip, Sonos, it's discovered the Sun integration, and there's many, many more that we can set up straight out of the box because these are all discoverable on my network. And you may be surprised, even if you've only bought one smart home gadget, you may be surprised how many smart home gadgets you find when you run this scan. I'm just going to leave it at the Sun and I'm going to click finish, and you'll see that we now have on our dashboard very little information. This is our base Home Assistant dashboard. We have a person entity here, which is me, because we set that person entity up when we set up the user account. We've got a binary sensor for the power status of my Raspberry Pi, and it currently says it's okay. If that changes, this will show something different. And we've got some weather info in that it is sunny and 11.5 degrees outside. Now at this point, you can then start setting up alternative networks, such as going to settings and then going to system and then going to network and setting up your wireless LAN settings here if you wanted to go down that path. So now that we've got our basic Home Assistant set up and you've made some decisions about your networking, whether you're going for wireless or Ethernet, I would now recommend that you start thinking about setting up a DHCP reservation in your router so that Home Assistant always gets the same IP address on your network, even if the Raspberry Pi or whatever you're hosting it on reboots. This will make your life a lot easier further down the track when you start needing to integrate other things or anything that needs to talk to Home Assistant back and forth. Now, because this is different for every router, I can only show you how to do that on my router, and that's not a consumer grade router. I'd recommend you Google DHCP reservation followed by the make and model of your home router. So that's the basic setup of Home Assistant for 2022. During the onboarding, we got the option to include a lot more of the discovered accessories on our network, which is definitely a difference from the previous time that we set up Home Assistant. And I feel like the onboarding went a lot smoother and a lot quicker than it has in past years. In the next video, we're going to be talking about how to choose and even integrating some of our smart home gadgets into Home Assistant. So be sure to subscribe if you're not already so that you don't miss out on the next video in the Getting Started with Home Assistant in 2022 series. Things have changed in the smart home landscape over the last couple of years, and there's some considerations now in 2022 that we need to bring into our mind when we're choosing home automation accessories. That's all we have for this video, and I do hope that it helped you get started on your home automation and smart home journey. Be sure to comment down below with home automation ideas that you'd like to see covered in future videos. Don't forget to follow HiveMind Automation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button down below to give it a like. If you're not already subscribed, now is a perfect time to consider changing that. While you're at it, if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get a notification when I release a new video, and that's normally every week. If you're currently in the market for a VPN provider, there is an affiliate link for NordVPN in the video description as well. I've chosen to partner with NordVPN because they've got the best infrastructure of any of the VPN providers that I've put research into. They have a strict no-logs policy and servers all over the planet. On top of that, they have apps for just about every platform around, including Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android. So no matter what platform you're using and wherever you are in the world, you can help to protect your sensitive information while you browse the web. So get a VPN today and use my link below to sign up for NordVPN. Lastly, if you like what I'm doing here and you want to help to support the channel, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Contributions you make through Buy Me a Coffee are put towards making more and better content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.